Have you ever watched an arrogant man burn his empire to the ground with one sentence? This is not an impulsive tale of throwing a badge and storming out. It is a ruthless game of chess where my silent retreat triggered a catastrophic system collapse. He thought he held absolute power, unaware he just stepped into a perfect trap forged by federal law and loyalty. Brace yourself. This office revenge is sharp, cold, and undeniably real. Welcome back to our community. Everyone, I want to express my deepest gratitude for your continued support, but I must share some difficult news. Our channel has had its monetization disabled by YouTube, leaving us without the budget to keep producing these stories. If you find today's episode compelling, please consider supporting us on our Patreon page to hear exclusive, true stories that are even more intense, detailed, and lengthy than what we can post here. Featuring multiple emotional voice actors. You can join by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the link in our description or comments. Now, let us dive into the story of Millie Hall. I served as the lead of medical logistics coordination at Aegis Healthworks in Chicago. Our mission was simple yet absolute: transporting critical medical specimens, rare serums, and emergency surgical equipment across the United States. Every single shipment was a lifeline, and my work directly determined whether a patient lived or died. I spent my days inside what we called the war room, commanding a team that functioned like a perfect, synchronized machine. We adhered strictly to Food and Drug Administration regulations regarding temperature control and chain of custody, maintaining an impeccable track record of 5 years without a single error. We were the best in the business because we treated every package like a human heart waiting for a transplant. The shift in our reality arrived with the company restructuring that brought Vance Sterling in as our new Chief Operating Officer. Vance was the quintessential tech bro, polished and superficial, coming to us directly from the fast fashion delivery industry. He was completely blind to the complex medical legalities that governed our every move. On his very first day, he stood in the center of our war room, glancing around with a smirk before mocking our security protocols and cross-checking procedures as the tedious work of people living in the past. I stood up immediately to explain the critical nature of maintaining our cold supply chain, where even a slight fluctuation in temperature could render a life-saving serum useless. I was only seconds into my explanation when he cut me off mid-sentence. He looked at me with cold indifference and delivered his new philosophy for the company: cut the legal red tape, or get cut from your jobs. As I watched him dismiss years of rigorous safety standards, I realized this was not merely a clash of management styles. It was a ticking time bomb that threatened both human lives and the political existence of our entire firm. I knew then that the calm, professional environment I had built was under siege by an amateur who had no idea what he was about to destroy. The rot did not happen overnight. It seeped into our operations like a slow-acting poison, suffocating the precise, clinical environment I had spent years meticulously building. Vance wasted no time executing his grand vision for profit optimization. He proudly unveiled Aegis Swift, a gig economy delivery model that operated exactly like a cheap rideshare application. His plan was to systematically phase out our highly trained, medically certified drivers and replace them with random freelancers looking to make a quick buck on their daily commutes. To him, transporting a volatile batch of oncology medication was no different than delivering a lukewarm fast food burger. I fought back with every ounce of professional authority I possessed. I spent 3 agonizing, sleepless nights compiling comprehensive risk assessment reports. I detailed exactly why handing over temperature-sensitive, life-saving materials to unvetted drivers without background checks or specialized refrigeration equipment was a catastrophic liability. I highlighted the strict federal mandates we were bound by law to follow, underlining the severe criminal penalties for non-compliance. I sent the files directly to his secure inbox, requesting an urgent review. Vance did not even bother to call me into his office to discuss it. I simply received an automated notification that my reports had been permanently deleted from his digital trash bin unread. When direct opposition failed to deter his reckless ambition, Vance decided to neutralize me entirely. He began a calculated, humiliating campaign of professional isolation. I found myself inexplicably locked out of our weekly strategic planning meetings. My calendar invitations were suddenly revoked with vague, dismissive excuses about executive capacity limits. Then came the ultimate insult. Vance promoted a 23-year-old marketing intern, a kid who did not possess a single medical compliance certificate, to a newly created executive role titled Route Optimization Specialist. This boy was given direct system authority to bypass my scheduling protocols, effectively usurping the power I needed to keep patients safe. It was a blatant display of disrespect designed to make me quit out of sheer frustration, a power play that prioritized corporate hierarchy over human survival. I watched in agonizing silence as the flawless system my team had maintained began to crack and splinter under the weight of his sheer incompetence. The gig workers had absolutely no idea how to handle delicate medical cargo. We started receiving frantic calls from critical care clinics about specialized serums arriving hours late. Nurses reported finding thermal packaging tossed carelessly into the trunks of dirty sedans, sitting right next to gym bags and spare tires. The digital temperature monitors inside the transport boxes flashed red, indicating the shipments had drastically warmed, spoiled, and were now entirely useless to the patients waiting for them on operating tables. It was a logistical nightmare that directly endangered lives on a daily basis. Yet, whenever a hospital raised a red flag, Vance refused to take an ounce of responsibility. I sat in horror in the war room as I listened to him on conference calls, smoothly gaslighting senior medical staff. Instead of owning his fatal errors, he arrogantly blamed the hospital receiving departments. "Your staff must have left the packages out on the loading dock," he would tell them, his voice dripping with condescension. He verbally falsified the delivery timestamps, spinning a tangled web of lies to protect his precious, cost-cutting algorithm. The sheer audacity of his deception made the air in the office feel toxic, heavy, and completely unbreathable. Most people in my position would have screamed, slammed their fists on the glass tables, or taken their grievances straight to the Human Resources Department, but Human Resources worked for the company, and the company was currently blinded by the massive short-term cost savings Vance was projecting on his glossy spreadsheets. A loud confrontation would only result in my immediate termination for insubordination, leaving the vulnerable patients entirely at his mercy. So, I stopped arguing. I stopped sending him warnings. I smiled, nodded politely during his obnoxious morning speeches, and retreated into the shadows. If Vance thought my sudden silence meant submission, he was disastrously mistaken. It was merely the calm before the execution. While he paraded around the office boasting about his revolutionized supply chain, I began to forge my weapon. I established a secure, encrypted personal data vault, a digital black box hidden deep within my own local servers, entirely off the company radar. Into this vault, I silently funneled every single piece of damning evidence. I backed up the comprehensive risk reports he had brazenly deleted. I saved the time-stamped emails where I explicitly warned him of federal health code violations. More importantly, I set up a hidden tracking protocol within our network to capture every single time Vance used his executive credentials to manually override the mandatory safety stops in our software. Every unauthorized route change, every falsified delivery log, and every illegal gig worker assignment was perfectly documented, time-stamped, and sealed away in my private archive. I became a ghost in my own department, meticulously cataloging the very evidence that would inevitably destroy him. He was eagerly handing me the nails for his own coffin, and I was quietly, patiently, lining them up. The suffocating atmosphere no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a perfectly constructed trap, and Vance Sterling was blindly walking right into the center of it. The breaking point did not arrive with a quiet whisper in a boardroom. It arrived with the howling fury of a Category 4 blizzard slamming into the eastern seaboard. The weather tracking grid on our main monitors flashed a violent, unrelenting crimson. All commercial flights were permanently grounded. Interstate highways were rapidly freezing over into death traps, and the wind chill plummeted to lethal levels that could crack solid ice. Inside the war room, the tension was thick enough to choke on. My team and I were operating on pure, unadulterated adrenaline, eyes glued to our screens. When the highest priority emergency hotline screamed through the silence of the room, it was Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. The head surgeon was on the line, sounding breathless and frantic. A young patient was already prepped on the operating table, their chest fully open, waiting for a highly specialized, genetically matched surgical tissue graft. We had exactly 6 hours to get that delicate biological material from our secure storage facility in New Jersey straight into the hands of the surgical team in Boston. If the tissue was exposed to the freezing ambient temperatures for even a few consecutive minutes, or if the internal battery of the specialized transport cooler failed to maintain the exact thermal required, the cellular structure would instantly crystallize, shatter, and die. It was a race against the elements, and the margin for error was absolutely zero. I did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. I slammed my hand down on the primary command terminal and initiated a code red protocol. This drastic measure bypassed all standard operating procedures, locked out financial caps, and authorized unlimited company expenditure to save a human life. I immediately mobilized our heavy-duty, weather-reinforced transport vehicle. It was a mechanical beast equipped with independent, dual-redundant heating and cooling compartments that drew power directly from a massive secondary engine block. I personally assigned our most veteran driver to the job, a man who had navigated treacherous ice roads in Alaska for 10 straight years. He knew the route, he knew the astronomical stakes, and he knew exactly how to keep that fragile cargo alive through the storm. The tissue graft was safely secured in the vault of the truck. The massive diesel engine roared to life in the loading bay below us, shaking the floorboards. We were 4 minutes away from a flawless, heroic dispatch. Then, the heavy reinforced glass doors of the war room violently swung open. Vance marched in, his face flushed with a toxic mix of misplaced authority and deep panic, holding his executive tablet like a drawn weapon. He had just received the automated financial alert regarding the code red expenditure, and he was absolutely livid about the sudden spike in operational costs. "Halt the departure right now," he commanded, his voice echoing sharply across the tense room, causing my dispatchers to freeze in their chairs. "Turn off that engine. Nobody authorized this massive spend." I stepped directly into his physical path, blocking his view of the bay windows. "Vance, we do not have the time to debate your budget today. We are on a strict 6-hour countdown for an open-heart procedure. The patient is already cut open on the table. This is a code red emergency." He sneered at me, tapping aggressively on his digital screen. "A code red is just an administrative excuse for you to burn through my quarterly profit margins. That specialized truck costs an absolute fortune to run, especially with hazard pay. I am pulling rank and overriding your command. We are putting this shipment on the Aegis Swift network immediately." I felt the warm blood completely drain from my face. "You cannot be serious. The gig drivers on your app do not have climate-controlled cabins. They are driving standard passenger cars in a historic, life-threatening blizzard. If their car heater fails, or if they get stuck in the snow for more than an hour, that tissue will freeze solid. A patient will die on the table because you wanted to save a few $1,000s. He leaned in close to me, his eyes gleaming with dangerous, unyielding arrogance. "My algorithm perfectly accounts for all weather variables. This is the ultimate stress test to prove my system works in a crisis better than your dinosaur methods. Put it on the app right now, or I will fire you right here in front of your entire team and do it myself." He did not even wait for my verbal response. He shoved past my shoulder, accessed the main terminal on my desk, and manually canceled the veteran driver's clearance. With 3 rapid keystrokes, he pushed the most critical medical payload of the entire year onto his cheap, unvetted rideshare platform. A random independent contractor in a beat-up civilian sedan accepted the $600 fare. The next 4 hours became a slow-motion descent into absolute logistical hell. The entire war room watched the tiny global positioning system dot of the gig worker on our monitors in complete agony. The amateur driver clearly did not understand the severe reality of the weather outside. Instead of sticking to the freshly plowed emergency arteries, he blindly followed a basic consumer navigation app right into a massive snowdrift on an uncleared secondary highway. "Get him on the radio, now," I commanded my team, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. "He is not answering his cell phone," my lead dispatcher replied, her voice trembling with unshed tears. "He just turned off his location sharing data to save his phone battery." When the signal finally reconnected almost an hour later, the bottom fell out of my stomach. The driver had abandoned the designated route entirely. He had pulled into a rural roadside diner to wait out the blinding storm, leaving his vehicle turned off in the freezing, unprotected parking lot to save his own gas. He had left the irreplaceable surgical tissue sitting in a dead, freezing metal box. The independent battery on the medical cooler fought desperately against the sub-zero temperatures for as long as it could. But without the car running to charge its systems, the power rapidly drained away. We all watched in absolute silence as the temperature telemetry on our dashboard flatlined. The tissue graft was completely, irreversibly destroyed. The fallout from the hospital was instantaneous and catastrophic. The surgical team in Boston had to hastily abort the primary procedure and resort to a highly dangerous, invasive backup plan to keep the patient from bleeding out. By some incredible medical miracle, the patient survived the night, but the hospital administration was completely furious. They immediately contacted their legal department and initiated a massive, multi-million-dollar gross negligence lawsuit against our company, threatening to pull our medical transport licenses nationwide. Most men would be utterly paralyzed by the crushing realization that their corporate hubris almost cost an innocent human life. Vance was not most men. Instead of facing the music and taking accountability for his fatal error, he cowardly retreated to his executive office, locked the heavy door, and went into pure, selfish survival mode. At 2 o'clock in the morning, long after the war room had been cleared out and the staff sent home, I sat alone in the dark living room of my apartment, watching my private monitor, my hidden tracking code, the invisible digital snare I had carefully woven into our network architecture months ago, suddenly lit up my screen. Someone was remotely accessing the central servers using top-tier executive credentials. It was Vance. I sat back and watched in real time, stroke by desperate keystroke. As he navigated deep into the restricted dispatch archives, he was terrified of the impending federal investigation and the board of directors. To save his own skin and protect his lucrative career, he was meticulously altering the permanent digital logs of the night. He completely deleted the record of his manual override on my terminal. He erased his digital authorization signature from the Aegis Swift assignment protocol. Then, with the ultimate, unforgivable act of cowardice, he forged my digital administrative stamp onto the final dispatch order. He was actively framing me. He was fabricating a false paper trail to prove to the authorities that I was the incompetent manager who recklessly entrusted a gig worker with a critical organ transport during a blizzard. A normal person might have felt blind panic. They might have frantically called an employment lawyer or typed out a desperate, emotional email of resignation to the company president. I did absolutely neither. As I watched his digital footprints solidify the very trap he thought he was setting for me, the burning outrage in my chest completely evaporated. It was instantly replaced by a deadly, freezing calm, the exact kind of cold, calculated calm a sniper feels right before pulling the trigger. The game was no longer about surviving his incompetence or protecting my job. It was about orchestrating his absolute, public destruction. The morning sun broke through the dissipating storm clouds, casting a harsh, unforgiving glare across the main floor of our corporate headquarters. The air inside the building felt remarkably thin, completely devoid of the usual frantic energy that defined our mornings. Instead, a suffocating silence hung over the cubicles. At precisely 9 o'clock, Vance summoned every single employee, from the senior dispatchers down to the newest interns, into the central glass atrium for an emergency all-hands meeting. He stood at the front of the room, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, looking entirely unbothered by the fact that a patient was currently clinging to life in an intensive care unit because of his staggering arrogance. He had prepared a presentation. Behind him, a massive digital screen displayed the catastrophic financial fallout from the failed Boston delivery, cleverly omitting any mention of the medical tragedy or the blizzard. He paced back and forth, holding a wireless microphone, projecting the image of a decisive leader taking control of a severe corporate crisis. And then, he began his meticulously rehearsed assassination of my character. He told the assembled crowd of nearly 80 employees that the failure of the previous night was a direct result of antiquated management. He pointed directly at me, his finger steady, his voice booming with manufactured outrage. He claimed that I had recklessly bypassed his optimized system, that I had panicked under pressure, and that my outdated emotional attachment to old protocols had cost the company millions of dollars in potential legal damages. My team, the people who had stood shoulder to shoulder with me in the war room just hours prior, stared at him in absolute shock. They knew the truth. They had witnessed him manually cancel the specialized truck. But Vance was not speaking to them. He was speaking to the board members dialing in remotely, spinning a narrative where I was the sole villain, and he was the tech visionary cleaning up my mess. He stopped pacing and planted his feet directly in front of my chair. The entire atrium held its collective breath. He looked down at me, his eyes wide with a triumphant, venomous glare, ready to deliver the killing blow to my career and cement his absolute authority. "This is a technology company," Vance announced, his voice echoing sharply against the glass walls. "It is not your outdated, bureaucratic clinic. We move fast, we optimize, and we do not let archaic legal tape drag down our margins. You are completely out of line with the future of this enterprise, Millie. So let me make this incredibly simple for you. Here, it is my way or the highway." He expected a fight. He expected me to scream, to cry, to desperately plead my case to the silent room, which would only make me look erratic and unprofessional. He wanted a dramatic, emotional confrontation to perfectly justify his false narrative. I gave him absolutely nothing. I did not yell. I did not offer a single syllable of defense. The silence that stretched between us was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Slowly, deliberately, I let a faint, icy smile touched the corners of my mouth. I reached up and unclipped my security badge from my lapel, the plastic snapping sharply in the quiet room. Next, I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my heavy, brass medical compliance seal. It was the physical manifestation of my federal authority, the legal instrument that validated every biological transfer that left our loading bays. Without that seal, the company was legally paralyzed, incapable of moving so much as a single vial of blood. I placed the badge and the heavy brass seal gently onto the glass table separating us. The soft clink of the metal echoed like a judge dropping a wooden gavel. I looked directly into his eyes, watching the brief flicker of total confusion break through his arrogant facade. "Then I choose the highway," I said, my voice low, perfectly steady, and devoid of any emotion. I turned my back on him. I did not look at my team. I simply walked down the center aisle of the atrium, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. The heavy glass doors slid open, and I stepped out into the crisp, freezing morning air, leaving absolute stunned silence in my wake. I did not go home to cry. I walked exactly 1 block down the street and stepped inside a quiet, dimly lit coffee shop. I ordered a black coffee, sat down at a corner table facing the window, and opened my laptop. It was time to pull the trigger. I was not simply resigning. I was detonating a legal nuclear bomb. I bypassed the corporate servers entirely and logged directly into the secure portal of the Food and Drug Administration. I opened a Form 483, the highest-level federal criminal whistleblower indictment available in the United States medical sector. In the attachment section, I uploaded the entire contents of my encrypted black box. I included the deleted risk assessments, the ignored emails, and most importantly, the irrefutable digital footprint of Vance accessing the mainframe at 2 in the morning to maliciously forge my medical authorization on a doomed shipment. It was pure, unadulterated proof of federal medical fraud, reckless endangerment, and data tampering. Under United States federal law, a Form 483 filed by a certified compliance officer with hard data evidence forces the authorities to initiate an immediate, hostile intervention within 24 hours. There would be no internal human resources review. There would be no corporate mediation. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the bitter warmth spread through my chest. Then, with the precise, calculated tap of a single finger, I hit send. The trap had officially snapped shut. 45 minutes after the glass doors slid shut behind me, the first domino fell with a deafening, silent impact. The head of legal compliance had been watching from the upper mezzanine during Vance's theatrical presentation. When the atrium finally cleared of the bewildered staff, he walked slowly down the stairs and approached the glass table, where my security badge and heavy brass seal still rested. He stared at the metal stamp. In the highly regulated world of medical logistics, that seal was the only shield protecting the company from federal devastation. He was a veteran attorney, and he instantly recognized the catastrophic legal vacuum my departure had created. Without my authorized signature, every single shipment moving forward was technically illegal. He did not say a single word to Vance. He simply turned on his heel, marched back to his office, and opened his laptop. He typed a resignation email consisting of exactly one sentence, sent it directly to the board of directors, picked up his leather briefcase, and walked out of the building forever. By early afternoon, the quiet shockwave of his departure rippled through the central nervous system of Aegis Healthworks. The news leaked into the war room, where my 6 senior dispatch specialists were sitting in a state of growing horror. These were highly trained professionals holding individual state certifications. They began communicating through their private encrypted chat channels, piecing together the terrifying reality of their situation. Under Vance's reckless leadership, they were being forced to execute logistics using an unvetted gig economy application. Without my federal license acting as an umbrella of legal protection, the liability for every single spoiled tissue graft, every delayed blood transfusion, and every ruined oncology serum would fall directly onto their personal credentials. If they stayed and continued to follow Vance's orders, they were not just risking their current jobs, they were risking the permanent revocation of their licenses and facing potential federal manslaughter charges. The choice was remarkably simple. One by one, they stood up from their command terminals. They did not coordinate a dramatic walkout or shout their grievances. They quietly drafted their formal letters of resignation, packed their personal belongings, and handed their notices to the bewildered Human Resources Department. When the Human Resources Director burst into the executive suite with a stack of resignation letters, Vance finally woke up from his arrogant delusion. True panic, raw and unadulterated, set in. He sprinted down to the war room, his tailored suit jacket flapping behind him, his face pale and sweating. He found the remaining core staff putting on their winter coats. He tried to physically block the main exit, his voice cracking as he swung wildly between desperate bribery and unhinged threats. "I will double all of your salaries right now," he shouted, his eyes darting frantically from face to face. "I will authorize a massive retention bonus for anyone who stays in this room. If you leave, I will sue every single one of you for breach of contract. I will completely blacklist you from the entire corporate logistics industry." His words fell on completely deaf ears. Corporate threats held absolutely zero weight against the terrifying, looming shadow of a federal penitentiary. Money meant absolutely nothing to a medical professional staring down the barrel of criminal negligence. They walked right past him, treating him as if he were completely invisible. As the evening pushed toward 9 o'clock at night, the catastrophic hemorrhage of talent reached its fatal conclusion. A total of 12 core personnel had officially resigned: the 6 senior dispatchers, the legal compliance director, 3 quality assurance auditors, and the 2 veteran shift supervisors were all gone. Every single one of them submitted official documentation stating their departure was due to a severely non-compliant medical working environment forced upon them by executive management. They systematically severed their legal ties to the doomed vessel. In less than 12 hours, the entire central nervous system of the company had completely self-destructed, deliberately severing itself from the head. Vance Sterling was left entirely alone in the center of the massive, cavernous war room. The 23-year-old intern he had promoted earlier was nowhere to be found, having fled the moment the senior staff began their exodus. All around Vance, the command terminals lit up like a nightmare. Hundreds of red warning bells began to blare simultaneously across the control boards. Hospitals from coast to coast were calling the emergency hotlines, demanding the immediate release of critical medical shipments that were now permanently grounded in our loading bays. But Vance could not help them. He did not possess the required medical compliance certificates to authorize a single release. He was a tech visionary without a product, a king without an army, completely trapped in a burning castle of his own making. He stood frozen in the cold glow of the monitors, desperately listening to the deafening alarm bells of an empire he had single-handedly murdered. The dawn of the next day brought a blinding, unforgiving light into the glass walls of the Aegis Healthworks headquarters. The building was completely devoid of its usual rhythmic energy. Inside the cavernous war room, Vance Sterling stood alone, a hollow shell of the arrogant executive who had commanded the floor just 24 hours earlier. The screens around him were a chaotic sea of flashing red notifications. Every major hospital network in the country was demanding the immediate release of their critical medical supplies. Desperation finally eclipsed his massive ego. He sat down at the main command terminal, his hands shaking slightly, and attempted to manually route the delayed shipments himself to stop the bleeding. He bypassed the internal security prompts and tried to directly connect with the National Medical Registry to forge a mass clearance protocol. The system's screen instantly locked. A stark, unyielding message flashed across the monitor, stating that his executive account had been permanently frozen by federal authorities due to a complete lack of verified medical compliance certification. He was entirely locked out of the very empire he had sought to conquer. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the main entrance shattered the morning silence as they were violently thrown open. Vance spun around, his face draining of all remaining color. A team of 6 federal agents from the Food and Drug Administration marched onto the main floor, their badges gleaming coldly under the fluorescent lights. Flanking them were 3 senior members of the Aegis Healthworks Board of Directors, men who usually only existed as voices on quarterly earnings calls. Leading the group was the chairman of the board, his face set in a mask of absolute, terrifying fury. In his right hand, he gripped a thick, bound folder containing the complete dossier I had submitted. Vance stumbled backward away from the terminal, his polished facade completely crumbling. He raised his hands in a frantic defensive gesture and immediately began to babble. "This is a massive misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of reality. "My entire senior staff abandoned their posts last night in a coordinated act of corporate sabotage. They walked out and intentionally crippled the supply chain to make my new technology fail. I have been trying to clean up their catastrophic mess all morning." The chairman did not even blink. He walked directly up to Vance and slammed the thick folder down onto the glass table with a deafening crack. "Do not insult our intelligence, Vance," the chairman said, his voice dropping to a lethal, quiet register. "We are not here because 12 of our best people resigned. We are here because at 2 o'clock in the morning, you logged into the central servers using your administrative clearance and manually altered the electronic logbooks. You intentionally destroyed the veteran driver assignment, pushed a critical surgical graft onto an unvetted gig worker during a blizzard, and then actively forged a compliance signature to frame an innocent director." The chairman opened the folder, revealing the undeniable, meticulously recorded data logs from my hidden black box. Every keystroke, every timestamp, and every unauthorized system override was printed in black and white. "You did not just violate company policy," the chairman continued, stepping aside to let the federal agents move forward. You committed massive, documented federal fraud and reckless endangerment of human life. The board has officially terminated your employment, effective immediately, and we are fully cooperating with the federal criminal investigation. The climax of his destruction was swift and entirely devoid of dignity. The federal agents instructed Vance to turn around and place his hands behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent room. He was marched out of the building, heavily escorted by security, right past the few remaining junior employees who watched in stunned, absolute silence. In a matter of minutes, his shiny corporate career was completely eradicated. He was stripped of his wealth, his assets were immediately frozen by the government, and he was left facing a mandatory minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. His name would be permanently erased from the American business landscape, remembered only as a cautionary tale of catastrophic arrogance. Exactly 1 week after the storm had finally settled, I was sitting at my favorite table in the corner coffee shop, enjoying the quiet morning sun. My phone rang. The caller identification displayed the private number of the board of directors. I took a slow sip of my coffee and answered. The chairman himself was on the line. The arrogance and authority he had displayed during Vance's arrest were completely gone, replaced by a tone of sincere, almost desperate humility. He formally apologized for the profound failure of executive oversight and practically begged me to return to the company. They offered me the newly created position of Vice President of Operations, complete with an unprecedented contract that granted me absolute, undisputed authority to rebuild the entire logistical network according to my exact medical standards. No board member and no executive would ever have the power to override my safety protocols again. I let him wait in silence for a few moments before I calmly accepted the position. After I ended the call, I set my coffee down and opened my messaging application. I created a new, encrypted group chat and carefully added the 12 phone numbers of the colleagues who had bravely walked out of the building with me. I typed out a simple message and hit send. The vacation is over. It is time to go back to saving human lives. Thank you so much to everyone for staying with me and listening to this story until the very end. I truly appreciate your time and your wonderful support. Where are you currently listening to this story from today? Please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's episode thrilling and want to help us keep this community alive, please consider supporting us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you can listen to our best, exclusive true stories that are simply too intense to make public on YouTube. You can scan the QR code right here on the screen or use the Patreon link provided in the description and pinned comment below. Thank you again, and I will see you in the next story.